Well, what I've said is I don't believe that we've had enough jobs created and industrial benefits done out of the F-35 contract. I think it's not enough. I think Canadians expect more, and we should get more. I know that Canadians want us to build more in Canada, build with Canadian jobs, and that's what I'm pushing for.
Canada just sent one of its clearest signals yet that the age of quiet obedience in North American defense procurement is over. Standing in front of reporters, Industry Minister Mélanie Joly delivered a line that would have been unthinkable a decade ago, and one that exploded across Canada's political landscape. She said Canada didn't get enough from the F-35 program, and for the first time in years, Ottawa is openly considering a fighter jet that is not American. This is not a routine procurement update. This is a strategic shift and potentially the biggest challenge Canada has launched toward U.S. defense dominance in decades.
When it comes to the Gripen, of course, we're really interested in seeing what can be done. 10,000 jobs is indeed a very interesting offer.
The debate reignited the moment Saab's executives arrived in Ottawa to showcase the Gripen E fighter jet. Their pitch was direct and daring. The Gripen could be assembled in Canada, supported by Canada's existing aerospace expertise, and backed by an offer of up to 10,000 Canadian jobs in manufacturing and research. They didn't just bring a plane, they brought an industrial partnership, a vision of Canada rebuilding its defense manufacturing capacity, and a product specifically designed for the brutal Arctic environments where Canadian pilots actually fly. By contrast, Canada's current F-35 arrangement, negotiated under previous governments, has produced far fewer industrial benefits than what Ottawa expected. The F-35 is unquestionably sophisticated, but it is also dependent on U.S.-controlled supply chains, expensive to maintain, and optimized for theaters of conflict far from the Canadian North. Joly did not try to sugarcoat any of this. She stood at the microphone and said clearly, "Canadians expect more, and we should get more." Her comments landed at a moment when the broader political environment is shifting. The United States, under President Donald Trump, continues to pressure allies with unpredictable tariffs and sudden trade escalations. Canada, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, is redefining its role in the global economy, prioritizing domestic production and pursuing strategic partnerships beyond Washington. Suddenly, a fighter jet deal signed years ago has become a symbol of a deeper question. Should Canada continue to buy American defense platforms when the political relationship is this volatile?
Canada's willingness to question the F-35 program reflects a larger national transformation. For decades, Canada's defense procurement followed an unwritten rule: buying American was safe. It aligned Canada with NORAD, simplified logistics, and reduced political risk. But the world of 2025 is not the world of the early 2000s. Trump's aggressive use of tariffs, pressure tactics, and America First policies has forced Ottawa to confront a reality that was once ignored: dependency comes with vulnerability. Joly's statement is not just frustration over job numbers. It is a public rejection of a mindset that viewed the United States as the automatic answer to every major defense question. Canada wants deals that produce real industrial benefits, not symbolic participation. It wants supply chains that support Canadian workers, not a system where billions of dollars leave the country while only a fraction returns. And most of all, it wants strategic leverage at a time when American policy can shift overnight. Saab's proposal represents something the United States never offered: genuine industrial partnership. The Swedes are proposing a model in which Canada doesn't just buy jets. Canada builds them, repairs them, trains on them, and incorporates them into a domestic aerospace ecosystem. That aligns perfectly with Carney's broader economic strategy, which emphasizes domestic production, supply chain independence, and a dramatic expansion of Canadian manufacturing across key sectors. There is also the geographic reality. Canadian pilots don't operate out of Nevada deserts or Mediterranean climates. They operate in places where -40 is normal, where runways freeze, and where snow can ground an aircraft in minutes.
The Gripen was engineered for exactly that. It can land on highways and icy surfaces, turn around quickly, and operate reliably in extreme cold.
These are not small advantages. They go straight to the heart of Canadian defense needs: the Arctic, sovereignty patrols, NORAD modernization, and rapid response missions in remote regions. Meanwhile, the F-35 is a fifth-generation powerhouse, but it was designed for global strike missions, carrier integration, and joint operations across the Pacific. Its maintenance footprint is heavy. Its cold-weather performance has been questioned repeatedly, and every upgrade, every part, and every software patch flows through U.S. channels. In a time when economic and political tensions are rising, that dependency is increasingly uncomfortable. But the stakes extend far beyond performance or maintenance. At the core of this debate is an uncomfortable economic truth. Canada has spent billions on the F-35 and received disproportionately little in return. American aerospace firms benefit, American workers benefit, American supply chains benefit. Canadian suppliers participate, but at levels far below what was promised at the start of the program. When Joly said, "We didn't get enough," she wasn't speaking casually. She was summarizing 2 decades of frustration inside Canadian aerospace industry. If Ottawa were to walk away from the F-35, the geopolitical consequences would be enormous. Washington would see it as a major breach of alignment. Trump, who has already used tariffs as punishment tools, would almost certainly respond. Lockheed Martin would launch an aggressive lobbying campaign, and U.S. lawmakers would frame Canada's decision as a betrayal of the defense alliance. The symbolic meaning of such a move would echo far beyond North America. It would signal that even long-standing U.S. partners now feel the need to diversify away from American defense systems. In Europe and Asia, this trend is already underway. Countries are building their own fighter jets, forming new defense alliances, and resisting Washington's attempts to preserve dominance over military procurement. Canada, considering the Gripen, places it firmly inside this global wave, a wave defined by multipolarity, industrial sovereignty, and strategic independence.
The real question now is not which jet should Canada buy. The real question is what kind of country does Canada want to be? A country that automatically buys American equipment out of habit, or a country that demands real value, real jobs, real independence, and walks away when those expectations are not met? Joly's message signals a new era in Canadian foreign and defense policy, one that matches Carney's broader shift toward economic diversification and strategic autonomy. Saab's Gripen may or may not become Canada's future fighter, but the political meaning of this moment is unmistakable. Canada is no longer afraid to challenge the assumptions that once defined its relationship with the United States. What happens next could reshape not just Canada's Air Force, but Canada's place in a rapidly changing world. The final decision will determine whether Canada steps confidently into a new era of independence or whether it remains tied to a system that no longer reflects its national interests.
If you poke a bear, they might strike back. And maybe that's the key takeaway. You know, the fact of the matter is for many Canadians, there's not much that they can do on an individual basis except boycotting, avoiding buying U.S. goods, or avoiding or delaying travel to the United States. And it looks like a significant proportion of Canadians not only are doing that, but believe that it is helpful or somewhat helpful.
Across Canada, a quiet but powerful wave of resistance is still rolling. Months after President Trump's sweeping import duties triggered a North American trade war, the boycott of U.S. goods and tourism has not disappeared. It is still growing. In supermarkets from Halifax to Vancouver, shoppers are reading the fine print on every label. Families planning winter trips to Florida are changing their destinations. Local stores now proudly display signs saying, "Made in Canada," And the message behind them is unmistakable. Canadians are choosing their side.
According to a new Nanos research poll, 4 out of 5 Canadians say that boycotting American-made stuff or avoiding tourism to the United States altogether will strengthen our country's bargaining position in the ongoing trade war launched by President Trump.
According to a new Nanos research poll released in October 2025, 4 out of 5 Canadians, roughly 80% of the population, believe that refusing to buy American products or avoiding travel to the United States strengthens Canada's bargaining position in the trade dispute launched by Washington earlier this year. Only 18% said the boycott is not helpful. What began as a policy fight between governments has become a movement of everyday citizens using their spending power as a form of quiet defiance. In a country known for moderation and diplomacy, this is a striking show of national unity.
When the Trump administration raised tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, furniture, and auto parts in early 2025, the intention was to force Ottawa into concessions. But the impact went beyond government offices and boardrooms. It reached directly into households. The numbers tell the story. In February, new import duties ranging from 10 to 35% were imposed under U.S. national security rules. By mid-year, the U.S. Department of Commerce reported that the average input cost in the auto sector had already risen by more than 12%. For Canada, a country whose manufacturing corridor depends on cross-border supply chains, this was devastating. Factories struggled and border paperwork multiplied, yet instead of backing down, Canadians began to adapt. A consumer shift took hold. Older Canadians led the charge. 85% of those aged 55 and above told Nanos research they support the boycott. Among those aged 35 to 54, 74% agreed. Support was strongest in Atlantic Canada and Quebec, where local industries have been hardest hit by the tariffs. What makes this moment different is the scope of participation. It is not limited to activists or politicians. Ordinary citizens, retirees, and small business owners are joining the movement. Even travel data shows a tangible decline in Canadian tourism to the United States, especially in border states like Vermont, Michigan, and New York. Tourism agencies in those areas have begun warning of lower bookings and declining retail sales. A strategy meant to isolate Canada is now hurting communities across the U.S. that depend on Canadian visitors. The boycott has turned into something larger than a consumer reaction. It has become a political signal. Trump's tariffs were supposed to pressure Ottawa by weakening its economy. Instead, they have strengthened the idea of economic independence. In practical terms, 3 consequences are now visible. First, consumer backlash. Canadians have internalized the dispute. Each purchase or canceled trip has become an act of self-assertion. Second, economic spillover. U.S. businesses near the border are feeling the loss of Canadian customers, especially in tourism and retail. Reports from regional chambers of commerce show significant declines in cross-border spending since the summer. Third, political momentum. The boycott gives Prime Minister Mark Carney's government greater leverage in ongoing negotiations with Washington ahead of the 2026 USMCA review. Public opinion is now firmly behind him. Data from the Nanos poll also reveals a supermajority effect. 54% of Canadians called the boycott very helpful, and another 26% say it is somewhat helpful. Combined, that's an overwhelming national consensus rarely seen in modern politics. The Trump administration may not have anticipated this. By using tariffs to project strength, it has sparked a collective determination among Canadians to protect their own markets. The White House expected economic pressure. Instead, it has encountered a surge of unity that crosses age, region, and political lines. The ripple effects are already visible. For decades, Canada's economy was deeply intertwined with the United States, from auto parts in Ontario to grain exports in the prairies and energy shipments from Alberta. Now that dependence is being reevaluated. In response to trade uncertainty, Ottawa is encouraging a Buy Canadian strategy across public procurement while exploring new export partnerships with the European Union and several Asian economies. The government is also using this moment to mobilize U.S. border states, reminding them that Canadian consumers are vital to their own economic stability. Within Canada, the boycott has taken on symbolic power. It represents more than protest. It signals a shift in national confidence, that Canadians, as individuals, can influence the direction of trade policy through their collective choices. In a global economy dominated by superpowers, that sense of agency is rare. Meanwhile, for Washington, the consequences are growing harder to ignore. Cross-border travel is down, tourism revenue in key U.S. regions has slipped, and public sentiment in Canada has hardened. Each of these developments chips away at the soft power the U.S. once enjoyed across its northern border. In trying to teach Canada a lesson, Trump has instead taught Canadians something else, that resilience and economic loyalty can be a form of sovereignty. The boycott may have started as a small act of frustration, but today it stands as a symbol of how ordinary people can shape the balance of power in a trade war.
We won't just manage through this crisis. We will prosper from it. Now more than ever, we need to take control of our destiny. We're focusing on our government's mission to make housing more affordable for all Canadians. You know, young Canadians.
In Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney has unveiled one of the largest housing initiatives in Canada's history. The new program, Build Canada Homes, begins with $13 billion Canadian in federal funding and a clear mission to double the pace of home construction over the next decade. The announcement was more than a policy speech. It was framed as a national mobilization to tackle a housing crisis that has left young Canadians locked out of ownership and families struggling with rising rents. Build Canada Homes will channel federal money, land, and regulatory power into a single agency, designed to make large projects viable and to accelerate approvals. From 6 pilot sites in cities such as Toronto, Ottawa, and Edmonton to a rental protection fund and a $1 billion commitment to transitional housing, the plan seeks to scale up quickly. At the heart of it is a shift toward modular and factory-built homes, a model intended to cut construction time by half and lower costs by as much as 20%. South of the border, the picture looks very different. President Donald Trump's second term has been defined by reciprocal tariffs on dozens of countries, and softwood lumber from Canada remains under some of the heaviest scrutiny. The U.S. Department of Commerce completed its most recent review in August 2025, setting average countervailing duties near 14.63% and anti-dumping rates above 20% for many Canadian producers. American builders argue that these tariffs feed directly into higher material costs. The path is straightforward. A charge at the border raises the price for wholesalers, which in turn increases the bids builders must accept for framing packages. In a sector where margins are already tight and interest rates remain high, the extra expense can decide whether a project moves forward or stalls. Industry groups in the U.S. lumber sector dispute the size of the impact, claiming price swings in lumber markets are more important. Yet for builders operating on fixed contracts, even modest increases become critical. For American families, the outcome is visible in fewer affordable options. The National Association of Home Builders has repeatedly warned that tariffs worsen the affordability challenge by making it harder to deliver entry-level homes. Smaller contractors, often the backbone of local construction, find themselves squeezed between rising input costs and customers unwilling to accept higher bids. Projects are delayed, scaled back, or canceled altogether. The pressure is not limited to new construction. Renovation budgets stretch thinner, and homeowners looking to repair or remodel discover that lumber-based materials eat into savings faster than expected. The tariff wall remains in place because Washington sees it as leverage in broader trade talks. But for households trying to enter the market, the effect is a structural headwind. Rising costs in labor and finance already weigh heavily, and lumber duties make the road to homeownership even steeper. That is why the contrast with Canada's new approach stands out so sharply. Build Canada Homes is designed to de-risk projects by approving them in bulk, offering flexible financing, and opening federal lands for development. The program also includes a $1.5 billion rental protection fund to keep existing units affordable and targeted investments in supportive housing for vulnerable populations. By prioritizing Canadian steel, aluminum, and timber, the initiative aims to strengthen domestic supply chains rather than rely on imports. The early pipeline includes 4,000 factory-built homes with capacity to expand toward 45,000 on the first sites alone. Execution risks are real, from fiscal strain to the challenge of scaling new construction methods. But the intent is unmistakable: to use federal power to make housing more accessible. In the United States, tariffs remain a source of rising costs. In Canada, public investment is being deployed to bring costs down. The two countries face the same crisis of affordability, yet their chosen responses reveal very different paths forward.